A warm welcome to all our viewers. Today, to our series Meaning of Life. I have a really great couple of entrepreneurs here today, Simone and Josua Kohberg. They have developed an app over years of development in order to better understand the personality in itself, to do analyses, but also to better recognise one's own potential. And if one or the other life topic comes up, how to deal with it with more ease and with more stability, without falling into drama straight away. These are the topics we want to talk about today. I'm very happy about that. Hello, you two. Thank you for coming. So you have developed this wonderful app with which you can analyse what kind of person you are through your voice. That would be the superficial consideration, to say that you can check in a company. Do the employees fit together? Or does someone fit into my company? We had already heard from you in an interview that there was just a time when you intuitively selected employees. That costs a lot of time and money. And then all of a sudden, through this voice analysis, a very great team has emerged which has just been able to use its potential. And today I'm interested in the app, in the analyses, because you also say you also get a real in-depth analysis. And what does the app user get as a present, so to speak? So, after the analysis, they get a multi-page, up to 40 pages, depending on what the voice image is showing, an analysis of oneself. So, what are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? What are the potentials? To what extent do they live up to their potential? To what extent are they detuned? At which level are they out of tune? That can be determined relatively clearly, and they also get their first steps.
And the interesting thing is, we said it is relatively extensive, of course, because it goes very, very deep. But we also integrated a kind of SWOT analysis in advance, where you can actually see exactly strengths, weaknesses, risks, also professional opportunities. And that alone is extremely valuable for many users. Because when suddenly I can see, as an example, I have the factor of communication 3 or 4 times in my personality, then it's clear that I could somehow use that as a strength in my private environment, in my professional environment. But there are also types of people who are not so strong in communication, but who may be trying to become a presenter or speaker because they've seen somewhere that it could be a fun job. But then they develop in a direction that doesn't really suit them in terms of personality. And so I can see in advance, especially with young people, what would be a suitable professional field. This is a huge topic for many of our customers, or even with adults, so let's say midlife crisis. Simone said in an interview that some people in their mid-40s, they often do a complete switch because they've lived something for years or decades, which doesn't suit their personality at all. And therefore the voice analysis is a phenomenal way to say, what are my strengths? And that's what I'll focus on.
Yes, especially nowadays, I keep hearing more and more teenagers and young people are completely disorientated. I mean, probably because the old job situation is slowly crumbling and the new one is not yet tangible, and then you don't quite understand where you're going. And in our school system, at least in Germany, I don't know what it's like here in Switzerland, but it's not very adapted to the whole restructuring and how fast the time goes. And I once had an interesting conversation with a university professor who said 20 years ago in a high school graduate class, 80% of high school graduates knew what they wanted to do and 20% didn't. And now after 20 years that has exactly turned, so less than 20% of the graduating students now know what they want to do. And I have that often in the job suitability analysis. This is also a division of voice which we cover wonderfully. People come to do a job suitability analysis because they don't even know where to find themselves in this sea of possibilities. And at an age, if I consider the 7-year cycle too, where they don't even have to grasp it yet, who are now deciding what to do. These are life decisions that they can't even make yet. And then I can already say from the voice image, look, You are a very sensitive tone, you're a very creative tone, you're a very people-oriented tone. You need an exchange with people, or you would be good as a therapist because you have something very sociable. There are tones that are absolutely social. Studying economics would not suit them. So they go out quite often and say, some things are clear to me now. What I may have always suspected a bit but couldn't grasp at all is now written here in black and white, and then they can simply cross out a lot of the possibilities. I once had a young student who was 14 years old. He really wanted to be a chimney sweep. He didn't even know why, and the parents said, chimney sweep? No, we don't want that. You have to go to university and so on. And then he took his job suitability analysis and said, well, now I'm at least doing an internship, and he's now finished his training. He's a chimney sweep, but he had the courage to say, now I'm going to get my way. Okay, but in the analysis, which occupation, what potential would that have been now? Where would you categorise that? I think he was a bass tone D. Great sense of responsibility, likes to work in a team, is a communicator, has an absolutely practical disposition, so he's taking action quickly. He also really wants to do something, and he always needs people around him to motivate him. So leaving him somewhere alone and having him study something by himself, it wouldn't have worked for him.
I can show you a SWOT analysis. So that's an excerpt. I'll hold it up to the camera, maybe people can see it. You can actually see how we summarise.
Try to keep it straighter.
Like this?
I think so.
You just see a summary now. This is a total of 40 pages analysis, but here I've almost a complete overview in one page. And if you look at the weaknesses now, for example, this is actually a very, very strong tone, also a leadership tone, but a major weakness because every coin has two sides. Inclination to laziness when under challenged at work. So that means if I read something like that and know this, I immediately recognise myself in it. The problem is that many customers don't realise this until they read this. So that's always the feedback that we get. They couldn't express it that way. But the moment I see it, I say, that's really interesting. But it really is a problem that I have. And suddenly a process of knowledge begins. I then work with these results for weeks, months.
Especially if I go back to our education system, we are working very hard there to point out the weaknesses to the children and to focus very little on the strengths. And right now, when I imagine the children are getting out of this school system, and whoever has not gone through with an A now has this tenor for now, you are worthless. You can't do anything, so those are the things that they are told. And then to realise this, wow. What are my strengths? And then in the SWOT analysis, so A, the strengths come out very clearly, we focus on the strengths, and specific job profiles emerge. So then these young people can read between 5 and 15 specific suggestions, what would be suitable for them, and they can still certainly modify it. Where else do you get that?
And maybe I can show that again. So there you see a voice picture. Just take a quick look at it. And the interesting thing is that every tone here has characteristics. Now, of course, the one in the middle, my bass tone, is the strongest, but every secondary tone has an effect in turn. How do I live my bass tone? And I'd like to give an example. If I have a person now, whether they're 15 or 45.
May I just briefly clarify for the audience and for me what exactly we look at? We have this pyramid here and different colours of tones. Interrupt me if I say it wrong, but every colour has a characteristic, so yellow and green.
Dozens of characteristics, exactly.
And now I see that I have empty bars.
Exactly.
And those are your unrealised potentials. Exactly, yes. And the middle one, you live quite well. They are already living it quite well, yes. And the orange one, a bit beyond that, minimally.
Exactly, that's not my voice image, it's just a pattern, exactly, but basically right. They live their bass tone very well, but then you can already see where it's getting weaker.
For example, now I see the C, which is now for me, or the C sharp and E. Can you briefly say something about that? For example, the C, that is a very nature-loving tone, and they don't live that at all. Probably because they live completely over the top of their bass tone, because they are too focused on something. And ideally, you use something of all tones. If I strike a string on the guitar, all 12 notes will sound. And that is the ideal. So the ideal pyramid would be to bring the dark colours to the grey area. Okay, yes. And then I draw on my full potential. Of course, as a G, I'm not as close to nature as the C, the green tone, but I use nature, if we stay with nature, to ground me. That is also the task of the G, of the main tone. Okay.
And maybe to use another example, when I say I have such a pyramid and the first 3 or 4 tones, for example, would be all tones that have a high proportion of creativity. And now I have a person who, perhaps because they were supposed to take over the company from their father, they studied business administration and took over the company. There's security, of course, financially anyway, but they're actually not happy, because they would have to be an artist with this voice image. They know that too. So deep down, they know that, but they can't put into words. As soon as there's such analysis in their hands, it doesn't matter if they're 30, 40, 60 years old. They say, dude, this is unbelievable. I feel that way too, but now someone is telling me, who doesn't even know me, because the app isn't even a person. You know, so they could of course make a Zoom appointment afterwards and have that confirmed. But first of all, they read this, and they know that their feeling is correct. Something is wrong. And then they can begin to align themselves with their strengths.
Yes, I think the important thing, which is also important to mention again, in the moment when I keep betraying my heart every day, I'm abusing my body. So I get sick, I have a heart attack, osteoarthritis, hip problems. I can't cheat the body. For a while it can be compensated for, but it catches up with you. So this really gives you a great support. Do I do this analysis once, if possible? When we said before, I have slept well, drunk enough, and when I am in a more stable phase? But life always changes. And so there are days sometimes. I mean, women know that anyway. A lot can change overnight, hormonally of course as well, change mentally. And one day I feel as if I just want to stay in bed, and the next day... But the voice is always right, so that's easy, the voice is always right. It always gives you the status quo. Of course, if I don't know my bass tone yet and say I want to work with it now, I would like to have a clean analysis now. I will do everything I can to do it when I'm stable, when I'm fine, in order to then have the result that I can work with. Of course, well, but if I'm now in a situation where I'm not feeling well, but now I finally have to know what's going on, exactly. I can anyway. You can do it anyway. We have also built in a tool that if something is completely out of tune and we say, wait a minute, we have to look at it again, we would contact you. But I think we got up to 90% of all possibilities that you get a proper analysis.
And the interesting thing is actually, so ideally I really only need to do it once, the analysis, because then I have my voice image, and of course I may then see that I'm not living all of my potential. But I'd then automatically start there when I work with my bass tone, when I take therapeutic measures. Then I could do it again after a year to check the analysis. That would also be possible. But basically it's actually enough to do my voice image just once, as Simone says. The voice is always right. That's defined only once. And then I also know what kind of character I am.
Do you know what just came to mind where you can also use this? If you have people who we have now had young ones, we had those in our professional lives, that period of life when you retire, when your professional life is over. Do you have experiences with that? With people who say, so now I'm actually faced with nothing. Inevitably, I have to deal with my partner on all day. For many, this is also a challenge. And of course, the generation that is retiring now has a completely different imprinting behind it than we or our children have, who are freer and more courageous and self-determined in their minds than the generation before us. How can pensioners use this now, that they say, I have to act out my creativity somehow, and then the analysis shows carpenter is a profession, and then they just make themselves a little carpenter's corner at 60? Exactly. I have a few examples. For example, I've had an entrepreneur who dreaded to pass on his company to the next generation, but who knew, I have to do it. I have to let go of this now, otherwise I am doing the younger ones no favours, the company no favours, and ultimately neither myself. But what am I doing now? I've been an entrepreneur all my life, and we looked at the voice image, and he was like Joshua. He had a bass tone G, so a leading tone, a communicator. You can't lock him up at home and say, do the garden, if he has not worked in the garden all his life and has no love for it. But during the process and while analysing his pyramid, it came to him, and that happens very often. That ideas come during a talk, and he said, I could be a business angel, I could be a mentor. And suddenly he had a perspective, and he left, and he called me later and said, I went to the Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and now they've set up a regulars table of old entrepreneurs, and this idea and that idea, and the young ones were very happy that he was gone and that he did his own thing again. Or, for example, I had a woman in her late 60s who came to me, totally charming, who said, my children are now grown, and I notice I tend to become a real mother hen, to interfere in the upbringing of their children. We did a voice analysis, and the tone was F sharp, so very creative too. Not as the main tone, but very close. And then I said, what about your creativity? And then she says, creativity? As a young woman, she always wanted to sing. And there was no time and no space for it. And then she signed up in the choir. And then she wrote to me 6 months later. She said, I've now bought an easel. She's starting to paint now, and it is no longer as a burden. Oh God, I'm at home now and I'm left and nobody wants me anymore. But instead, hey, I can now live my creativity that I haven't seen at all in my entire life. So that's really exciting. Great, yes. Great, such great stories. Nice. Yeah, Joshua, what else did you bring us here?
Oh, was there a wrong picture? Oh, wait, I have to go back again. Because you asked the question earlier whether the voice image can also change.
Ah, yes, that's a good idea.
Because this is my voice image. That might be very interesting for the audience, that you explain briefly, Simone.
That's 3 different images. Exactly. In the top left of the picture, you can see a voice image of Joshua as it normally is. So it's G, this orange-red tone in the middle, and a relatively even pyramid. A gradation. Also, as a person, he is someone who is always in a good mood. The 2 tones on the left, these violet tones, they can show detuning. You see a bit of temporary stress. Oh yes, okay, the tones on the left are detuning. So when someone is torn out of harmony, so to speak, but they're still quite unstressed, look good.
But you can see, for example, too much work, little movement. So that's always an issue for me.
The tone on the right, the H. I see you have to go a little more into the forest.
Exactly.
It shows too much energy. The olive-coloured one, so too little exercise, a lot of work, little exercise. So with competitive athletes, for example, the H rises on the far right, rises enormously during an injury break. When they are at home, perhaps you know it when a runner is suddenly at home for 6 weeks with a ruptured cruciate ligament. The wife says, please take them off the couch for me. They're lacking serotonin. Exactly, and then the H rises. That was a bit higher because he had a little movement, a little compensation. The second picture, you might think that this is from a completely different person. This is Josua too, after 4 serious emergency surgeries that he had in 2015, where he was closer to death than to life for several phases. So very critical. You said earlier that life brings up things which we don't always want. I did an analysis shortly after his stay in hospital because I said, I just want to see what happens now. He was neither in his tone nor was he even remotely in his system.
I also got 90 antibiotic infusions that, of course, have a physical effect.
On the intestinal flora, on everything. You see, if you look at the 2 voice images above, you see how the system is chaotic. There is nothing left in the right place, especially the 2 purple tones. But then you already know, as an analysis expert, if the left deflects like this, it can't be good in the middle. Exactly. Then you will be able to create a new one at some point when the trauma has regulated itself, exactly. But then you would also contact a customer and say, we should look at it again. Yes, and pay attention, exactly. And there you see that, so he wasn't in his tone at all. He wasn't at his strength at all. He was extremely stressed. That was 4 weeks after the last surgery, I think.
And you have to say maybe, and before you explain the third voice pattern, so my leg should be taken off because of this blood poisoning. Then almost 10 days of multiple organ failure, always just before. So they actually said to me that I will not work for a year now, that I'll never be able to ride a bike again. I would walk with crutches, be in a wheelchair for the next 5 or 6 months and so on. But of course already during the emergency surgeries, I worked with the tone every day. So we did several things. Of course I also drank water that was highly conditioned. A lot of things that we just use in our normal life. But the fact is the third voice image was in December, I think.
No, it was the end of October, so we worked intensively with the sound. We also treated the foot with sounds. He actively sounded. He wore a news for 24 hours with his tone, and 4 weeks after the second picture, after the chaotic picture, it moved into place again. So he sorted himself, and contrary to the doctors who said he will never be able to bend his foot again, when you know what the subconscious controls, that they keep working with these devastating triggers. This is unbelievable. That's really astonishing, but that was really another great example for me to show in such an acute case, the voice is always right.
Exactly, and actually the beautiful thing about the third voice image is you can still see the image, but my bass tone is back. I was on the go again, and in fact 4 weeks or 5 weeks after the hospitalisation I was back on stage for the next lecture when the doctor said he won't do anything before Christmas. So just to show what this harmonisation is.
But there is also a rebellion behind that, right? I know that too. That's the tone. G, I won't take any commands. I will prove the opposite. I think then I also know which tone will be my result. Yes, communicator.
It's definitely a very exciting concept, so I think that many people who will try this, and the first step is basically free of charge with the app, just by the way, they'll have an incredibly exciting experience with it. So I can only recommend it to everyone to try it out.
Great, that sounds really great. I'm excited. I'll do it now too. I definitely need it. But I think it's most beautiful for children, I really have to say. So that really convinced me. And that you can see what's going on. You save so much time, and how often do you hear from your children? I don't even know what to do. Yes, and it's so great for us mothers too. To see, okay, that's their potential. Let them. Now just let them evolve towards that. I think it's fantastic. Thank you very much for your great work and for coming again. Thank you. See you soon.
See you soon.
Dear viewers, it is unbelievable what valuable information you can get about yourself. With such tones, I hope you were able to take a lot with you too. Have fun exploring and have a good time. See you soon. Bye.